Eric Ray was born in 1926 in London, England. He was the son of a hairdresser, actually a hairdresser to the royal family, and that relationship actually served him well. When, during the war, he was able to secure a commission with the Imperial Frontiersmen. This is an organization that was charged with protecting the royal family's real estate during the Blitz. Here's a picture of Eric. Well, with the Imperial Frontiersmen, he studied Chinese, English, Latin, and Hebrew calligraphy. And his artistic experience, his artistic prowess, really caught the attention of a lot of people. And because of that, he was transferred to the Admiralty's Maps and Charts Division of the Royal Navy. After the war, Dachau, the former concentration camp outside of Munich, was turned over to the Americans. And in doing so, it became a camp for displaced persons, or DPs. There, thousands of Jews were kept and basically held in incarceration. And during those times, were forced with starvation, continued hunger, continued disease. The dying continued. During this time, word of Eric Ray's calligraphy reached the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, and in 1947 they had a job for him as a forger. Shipped to Marseille, France, the port town, he evaded British intelligence, and with help from locals and French police, he was smuggled into Germany by being tied to the undercarriage of a train, wrapped in burlap, and shipped into Germany. You can imagine this story. It comes straight from a movie. Periodically, the porters on his trip would untie him, give him respite from the elements, provide him with food, provide him with water, but then just to be tied back onto the train. Once he was close enough to Munich, close enough to Dachau, he was finally taken off the train for the last time, but then smuggled in a cart of pig manure. He was approaching the gates of the camp. Adversity is present in everybody's life. You feel it. I feel it currently as I'm speaking in front of you. And in doing so, I've learned two things about adversity. The first is how we approach this adversity. It can dictate our path forward. It can dictate our chances of success. It can't be something that we hide from. As a 6-year-old boy, sitting on a cold slab of a medical table, hearing words of blindness, losing one's feet, losing one's hands, having a severely diminished life expectancy, doesn't quite resonate to a child at that age like it does to an adult. To the father of this 6-year-old boy, though, my dad was traumatized and kind of really was taken aback, quickly falling down the path of victimization. You know, how could this happen to us? However, the lesson I learned about adversity that day as a 6-year-old child with the diabetes was the question that my father asked at that moment, and I will never forget it. So how do we beat this? This childhood diagnosis to a 6-year-old meant really nothing to me other than I wasn't going to be able to eat Halloween candy all that time. But my dad's approach to it was a lesson that I carry with me to this day. I remember fondly the trips that we would take out to Colorado on ski trips, and there was this classic thing that my dad would do. We would go for a run after dinner every night. He immersed himself in the research, and at that time even we understood that if you exercised, you would increase your metabolism, you would increase how much the insulin would process your sugars, keep your blood sugars low. And this is how we were going to beat it. And that's the question that we constantly would ask in our family. So how do we beat this? When being presented with something that was going to be in our face, so how do we beat this? Remember these runs late at night? He would always dangle this little carrot in front of me. There was an arcade at the base of Copper Mountain. And so far, far away from where our condo was, we would go for a run every night. But he would never use the diabetes as an excuse. It was never about diabetes. In fact, I think there may be some of you in this audience today that know me that didn't even know I was a diabetic. I was never going to be defined as a diabetic. We were going for runs to keep our legs in shape for the next day of skiing. We were going for a run because there was an arcade at the base of Copper Mountain, and I could go play. It was never about those stupid beta cells not functioning. Okay, this fear and uncertainty, it was replaced with the question, how do we beat this? The arcade is long gone. It's not there anymore, not even close. In fact, this is a picture of that same square in Copper Mountain, and these are my two children, my wife, some 3 decades past. And it's not there, but the memories still linger. It's that one fundamental question we always hold true and dear. So how do we beat this? All right. Returning back from Colorado, so I lived in Colorado for about 10 years. For a winter break, my dad had gone to a doctor's appointment. He had a sore throat. My mom got a phone call, and it was the worst news you can imagine. It was cancer, stage 4 of the throat and tongue, and we had to get to the doctor's office immediately. So my mother and I rushed to the hospital and saw my dad there, and immediately fell down the classic path of, I say, victimization. How could this possibly be happening to us? To this day, I don't know who asked it first, but it came out, okay? So how do we beat this? Year, treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, feeding tube, speech treatment, just the classic hellish nightmare that is cancer. A year later, my dad was cancer-free. This is a picture of him skiing. So in this time, we knew that with diligence, with drive and determination, that adversity could again be defeated. Returning to the mountains of Colorado, on that same shoulder of the mountain where my father taught me how to ski, on that same shoulder of the mountain where my dad taught me that resilience could defeat adversity, time caught up with Dad. Chest pains were significant. He was having a massive heart attack. He was rushed to the emergency room, rushed down to Denver to get out of the high altitude, putting his heart under additional stress. He would never return to his mountains. He recovered. He fought it. He kicked its ass. Pardon the French. And with determination and with grit, came back to Minnesota. And he fought this off. Now, it was revealed during this that his baroreceptors had been basically ravaged. Baroreceptors, they're receptors in our arteries that can determine blood pressure. It's how our brain knows if our blood pressure is increasing or decreasing. Our body responds to it. My dad basically didn't have baroreceptors anymore, telling his brain if his blood pressure was up or down. And so we recognized at this time that his blood pressure was all over the place. High, low, high, low. But again, the question was asked, it's coming. So how do we beat this? Significant research my dad did, the number of doctors, he drove crazy with his hours of visits. He was going to beat it. New Year's Eve day, got a call from my mom at 2 in the morning. Dad had had a stroke. The baroreceptors gave out. Brother and I got on the plane, flew down to Kentucky where they were, saw him on that bed, and saw just a ravaged man. But the question came out. I don't even know if we knew it was possible, but we asked. So how do we beat this? Doctor looked at us like we were crazy. He didn't know what he was up against. Dad came home, emergency transfer in an ambulance from Kentucky to Minnesota. I think at times my dad was in every single hospital in the metropolitan area with bouts of pneumonia, speech therapy, feeding tubes, beds, nurses, doctors, just all of that stuff. He was beating it. Yeah. He was on his way. Speech was coming back. Mobility was coming back. Adversity had been defeated once again. Grit and determination. Morning after school got out that year, groggy, tired, not necessarily knowing what's going on, I got the call. Dad had had a heart attack and wasn't going to make it. Went to the hospital, said our goodbyes, and that was it. Adversity had won, or had it. Passing through the gates of Dachau, Eric Ray was smuggled into a small cavity in the wall. It was the former bathroom of all the Nazi guards. And there he shaved his head, He forged numbers on his own wrist, dressed himself in prison stripes that had been smuggled into the prison with him, and he became a prisoner himself. Using his calligraphy skills, he forged 5,000 inmates out of Dachau. Their lives are in favor to him. As a prisoner in Dachau, you would only get food if you were out for roll call. And now remember, this is after the war. But still, you were only fed by the American guards if you were out for roll call. So he would switch places with another prisoner. In fact, he got the nickname of Eric Halfman. He would switch and alternate places to be able to eat, eating half of the food of a normal prisoner who was already facing starvation. He saved 5,000 lives. On the last transfer out, he forged his own papers. Now think of what he had done up to this point. Imagine the trauma that he had seen. Imagine the lives that he had saved. Imagine the lives that he had lost. But rather than returning to America, rather than returning to England to face an easy life, he smuggled himself onto the ship, the Adelina. It's the famed ship of the paramilitary group Irgun. There, he sailed to the newly formed state of Israel and was promptly shelled by the Israeli Defense Forces. The Adelina was sunk by the Israeli government in Tel Aviv harbor. He survived the shelling, swam ashore, wet clothes, dripping wet feet, shoeless. He was found by a shoe store owner and given a pair of shoes. And the question was, had adversity prevailed or not? And there lies the second lesson. Adversity is part of all of our lives. The person sitting next to you has faced countless adversities. Every single one of us, by our own making, by the making of others, it's a commonality. It's a commonality we share. So the second lesson that I've learned is that facing adversity is necessary. We don't ever truly defeat adversity, and that's okay. It's how we face it. It's how we tackle each and every day. It's how we fight with vigor. It's how we fight with determination. It's how we ask my dad's question, so how do we beat this? It's recognizing that we're not in this game alone. The nurses, the doctors, the countless people, friends and family who helped my dad, even though he didn't survive, they helped him in that path, and they all gained from that experience. Eric Ray would have never made it out of the port city of Marseille without the French military, police, without his porters. We all have help. It's always there. Look for the helping hand. So, how we approach adversity, the experiences we collect and the memories made from how we face adversity, these impart the lasting vestiges of these experiences. It's through this adversity that we truly grow into who we are as people. Adversity can never be fully escaped, but the battle is always worth fighting. Thank you.